On the nights when London theatre blazed with its brightest glow, Margaret Leighton stepped forward as if she were carved from resolve itself. Audiences saw a woman who never hesitated, never wavered, a performer whose voice could slice cleanly through silence, and whose presence filled the room long before she spoke a single line. To the public, she was the very definition of control, the kind of actress who made mastery look effortless. Yet beneath that flawless exterior, a different story was unfolding. Her hands began to tremble in ways only she could feel. Her steps, once so precise they seemed choreographed by instinct, carried the slightest falter. She pushed through each performance with a determination the audience mistook for emotional depth, never revealing how fiercely she battled to keep the illusion intact. She hid the truth behind discipline, refusing to offer even the smallest hint that her body was slipping away from her grasp. Years later, a director who had watched her up close during those final months would admit a truth that haunted him. I wasn't sure whether she was delivering the greatest performance of her life or fighting not to fall. In the darkness beyond the stage lights, the question lingered unanswered. What was happening to Margaret Leighton when the world believed she was at her strongest long before her name became an anchor of British theatre? Margaret Leighton was known simply as a performer whose presence felt startlingly precise. In the post-war years, when audiences sought stories that could steady a shaken world, she emerged as one of the rare talents able to deliver truth with every breath. Directors trusted her instincts, critics studied her methods, and viewers were drawn to the clarity and elegance she brought to even the most understated role. Her performances didn't just entertain, they recalibrated the emotional rhythm of every stage she touched. Her ascent was steady, built not on grand gestures, but on an unwavering commitment to her craft. Whether embodying a character in an intimate playhouse or commanding a frame on film, she approached her work with a seriousness that marked her as singular. Awards soon followed, each one reinforcing what many already believed, that she stood among the finest actors of her generation. Her name traveled across continents, carried by reviews that praised her sharp intelligence and the quiet force of her artistry. To the public, Margaret's life resembled a textbook rise, every project a triumph, every role another step upward. She became a symbol of discipline and refinement, an actress whose path seemed untouched by doubt or misfortune. Her image shone brightly, reflected in glowing write-ups and breathless admiration from audiences who felt they understood her. But behind the glittering surface of her reputation, something fragile was beginning to shift, setting the stage for a struggle no one could see. Margaret Leighton's beginnings were far from the polished world she would one day command. She grew up without the glamour or connections that smoothed the path for many performers. What she had instead was a remarkable sensitivity and ability to read people with unusual clarity, to sense tension in silence, and to understand emotion long before she ever stepped onto a stage. Acting didn't feel like an ambition. It felt like a language her instincts had always spoken. Her first encounters with theater were almost accidental, yet the moment she entered a rehearsal hall, she felt a resonance she couldn't ignore. It wasn't the applause she craved, it was the structure, the storytelling, the discipline that shaped every scene. Still, her early years were riddled with setbacks. Rejections cut deeply, and the uncertainty of her prospects often left her questioning whether she belonged in an industry that tested even the strongest spirits. More than once, she considered walking away before she lost herself entirely to disappointment. But something always pulled her back. A fleeting moment in rehearsal when a character suddenly made sense. A mentor who told her she had a rare instinct for truth. The surge of connection she felt when an audience quietly leaned toward her as if sharing the same breath. Each small affirmation steadied her, pushing her through the doubt that had once threatened to overwhelm her. Her defining breakthrough came with a role requiring an emotional precision she had never been asked to summon before. She embraced it with a focus that startled even those who had already recognized her potential. The reviews that followed marked a turning point. Critics praised her depth, audiences began remembering her name, and directors started seeking her out with new urgency. The uncertainty of her early years dissolved into a growing sense of purpose. Margaret Leighton was no longer searching for her place. She was stepping fully into it, becoming the kind of performer whose presence signaled that something meaningful was about to happen. As Margaret Leighton's reputation solidified, the admiration she received began to cast a longer, more demanding shadow. Success brought opportunities, but it also built an invisible framework around her life, one that required discipline so intense it often bordered on sacrifice. She accepted roles with a seriousness that left little room for anything outside the theater. Each performance demanded emotional excavation, and she poured herself into her characters so fully that the remnants lingered long after the final curtain fell. The first things to slip away were her personal connections. Friends noticed her drifting not out of disinterest, but because her mind was constantly orbiting the next rehearsal, the next line, the next transformation. Relationships faltered under her devotion to work as she spent more hours inhabiting fictional lives than nurturing her own. Those close to her admired her brilliance, yet they often felt shut out by the very intensity that made her extraordinary. Her industry, particularly in her era, rewarded stoicism but punished vulnerability. She learned quickly that showing fatigue or uncertainty could threaten the image she had built. So she crafted a facade of composure and unspoken agreement with the public that she would always appear steady, elegant, and in command. Behind that facade lived a woman carrying the weight of expectation, pushing herself harder than anyone realized. Each new accolade only reinforced the pressure to remain flawless, even when the demands stretched her to the point of exhaustion. Sleep became scarce. Moments of solitude grew shorter, and as her fame widened across continents, her privacy shrank just as quickly. Every triumph required another layer of commitment, another portion of her energy, another piece of the life she once knew. She kept giving, convinced that this was the price of living up to the promise the world believed she represented. By the height of her career, the world saw an actress at the pinnacle of her power. But beneath that shining image, the cost of her dedication had already begun to carve deep traces into her life, signs of an impending struggle she never anticipated. It began with moments so fleeting that even Margaret herself struggled to understand them. A shift in balance during a scene she had mastered, a faint tremor threading through her hand when she reached for a familiar gesture, a thin, unsteady edge to her voice, a sound she had never heard from herself before. At first, she dismissed it all as fatigue, the natural consequence of a life lived in relentless motion. But the signs persisted, growing more pronounced in ways she could no longer ignore. Directors noticed, though they kept their observations to themselves. They watched her performance evolve in ways that felt strangely unpredictable, moments of brilliance that seemed sharper than ever, followed by small slips she disguised with remarkable skill. When she stumbled, she turned the misstep into a character choice. When her voice shook, she folded the tremor into emotion. Audiences believed she was discovering new layers of intensity. No one suspected the truth: her body was beginning to betray her. Behind the curtain, the illusion became harder to sustain. Objects escaped her grasp without warning. She found herself pausing before crossing the stage, calculating how to move without revealing the instability creeping into her limbs. The exhaustion she felt was no longer tied to long rehearsals. It lived deeper, coiled within her, in a way rest could not reach. Medical answers arrived with a heaviness that confirmed her fears, and she met them with the same quiet resolve she brought to the stage. She would tell no one. She would not let her illness become the narrative that defined her. Her life narrowed into a delicate balance between concealment and survival. She worked longer hours to compensate for the unpredictability of her movements. She withdrew from those who cared for her, fearful that their concern might expose the truth she fought to hide. Each day demanded a level of resilience the world would never see, and each night she stepped onto the stage, determined to keep the mask intact. By the time her symptoms intensified beyond subtlety, she had already entered a battle that no amount of discipline could win. Her performances still radiated the force of her artistry, but beneath the surface the shadows were growing. The world saw a woman at the height of her craft. Only Margaret understood how quickly that light was fading. In the twilight of her stage career, Margaret Leighton walked into the spotlight with a resolve that bordered on heroic. What once required instinct now demanded calculation. Every gesture, measured; every step deliberated; every breath steadied with quiet discipline. The physical certainty she had relied on for decades was slipping away, yet she refused to allow it to alter the ritual of performance she cherished. Each appearance became a negotiation between her will and her weakening body, a battle she fought in silence before the audience ever took their seats. On stage, she held herself together with astonishing control. Her legs threatened to give way beneath the fabric of her costume, but she kept her posture tall. Her hands trembled, but she turned the motion inward, transforming vulnerability into character. Her voice, once crisp and unwavering, carried a faint tremor that critics described as emotional intensity. The spectators, unaware of the reality before them, believed they were witnessing an actress entering a new phase of creative depth. In truth, Margaret was fighting to stay upright, determined not to let the truth bleed through. Beyond the lights, her struggle became impossible to disguise. She leaned against door frames to steady herself. Assistants hovered discreetly nearby, sensing her strength thinning even when she refused their help. Her movements slowed each transition from one side of the stage to the other, requiring enormous concentration. Yet she never complained. She never allowed anyone to glimpse the magnitude of what she endured. Her silence was not denial, it was a final act of devotion to the craft that had shaped her entire life. Eventually, her illness advanced to a point where no amount of resolve could compensate. When she delivered her final performance, the air in the theater felt charged with something indefinable. She spoke each line with a depth that carried the weight of farewell, imprinting the moment onto the memory of everyone watching. When the applause rose, she lingered in the glow just long enough to acknowledge what she already knew: this was the end of the life she had built on stage. As she stepped away, she left behind a silence as profound as any role she had ever played. In the years that followed Margaret Leighton's final departure from the stage, her story deepened in ways no one could have anticipated. As the truth behind her declining health slowly became known, audiences and colleagues revisited her performances with a clarity that had been impossible during her lifetime. What once appeared to be artistic invention revealed itself as something far more courageous: an actress pushing against the limits of her body while still delivering work marked by precision, grace, and emotional depth. Every tremor, every careful pause, every softened breath seemed newly weighted with meaning. Her decision to keep her struggle private shaped the way she is remembered. She refused to let her illness overshadow the artistry she had spent a lifetime perfecting. That silence, once misunderstood as aloofness, has come to be seen as a testament to her dignity and strength. Fellow performers recalled her unwavering discipline, the way she maintained her composure, even when the effort cost her more than any role demanded. Directors reflected on rehearsals where her determination bordered on astonishing, admiring her ability to give fully of herself long after her body began placing limits on what she could do. In time, her body of work grew into something larger than a catalog of performances. It became a map of resilience, a record of a woman who refused to allow adversity to dictate her legacy. Young actors studying her recordings discovered not only a master of technique, but an artist whose commitment ran deeper than applause. Her influence extended quietly, inspiring generations to treat the stage not as a place of perfection, but as a place of truth, even when the truth required incredible strength to uphold. Today, Margaret Leighton lives on in the memories of those who saw her, the admiration of those who follow in her footsteps, and the evolving understanding of what it means to create under pressure. She is remembered not as someone defined by struggle, but as someone who continued to shine in spite of it, a legacy carved with quiet bravery and unwavering devotion. Margaret Leighton's story settles into memory with a quiet force, one that grows stronger the more her life is revisited. Her brilliance on stage was undeniable, but the truth hidden beneath it reveals something far more profound. She stood before audiences radiating control and artistry while carrying a private burden that would have silenced many. Fame illuminated her achievements, yet it also cast shadows that concealed the depth of her struggle. In that contrast between what the world saw and what she endured alone, her humanity becomes unmistakable. Her decision to protect her illness from public view was not an act of pride, but a final gesture of independence. She refused to be defined by the limits her body imposed, choosing instead to let her artistry speak for her. And when the truth eventually surfaced, it transformed the memory of her work, Those who had admired her found themselves struck by a new sense of reverence, realizing that some of her most powerful performances were delivered while she fought a battle no one else could see. Her journey stands as a reminder of the unseen stories carried by those we celebrate. What her life leaves behind is not sorrow, but respect. Not silence, but resonance. Her legacy invites us to look beyond the lights and consider the people who stand within them. What do you remember about Margaret Leighton, and if you could speak to her now, what would you want to say? Thank you for watching, for listening, and for sharing in this reflection. If her story touched you, we invite you to engage, to share your thoughts, and to continue exploring the lives of those who walk the narrow line between brilliance and vulnerability. Fame and shadows, every star has its story,